So I don't think I knew much about orchestration as I was starting out as a songwriter. I basically just grabbed some keyboard chords that were the same chords that I'd played on piano and made more pads except with orchestral or string sounds or woodwind sounds. And I thought maybe just by going like this, I was playing more real orchestral type sounds by just moving my hands around. But during my master's degree, it took a turn, and I took a class called Orchestration, and it has changed my life and my composing, and so has some of the recent composing I've been doing for different libraries and things like that. And so, yes, I knew instruments, and I knew what they could do in their approximate ranges, but I never really thought that much about it. Well, today we are really going to think about it. And when I say we, you're probably saying, who is we? Do you have a mouse in your pocket? Well, welcome to the HelloComposers podcast, which will also be on the Make Music Income channel. But today I'm going to attempt to talk about all of this orchestration stuff, but not by myself. Oh no, I have brought in someone who at least knows as much as me, I hope, and maybe more. My friend, my co-educator, both online and at Orlando recording schools, the bearded Bartok, the man behind the screen at 52 Qs. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Dave Kropf. How you doing, man? How you doing, man?
Oh, I'm doing well. Bearded. Oh my goodness.
Did you know?
Hey.
Did you know you had a beard?
Yeah. No, I've never received such accolades. Thank you very much.
The bearded Bartok. I just came up with that. So, thanks so much for joining us, man. And what have you been up to this week? Have you been composing anything? What is your composing world look like recently?
Let's see. This week, I was adding some synthwave drums to a rock cue. So it's a modern rock cue for sports broadcasting. And I thought, well, I wonder what would happen if we just took like the sound of Aha, Take On Me, like those drums, and throw it in with a modern rock cue. And it's very interesting, and I like it. We'll see if the publisher digs it. But adding some EDM synthwave elements and creating these hybrid cues. I don't know. I feel like hybrid type of styles are the way forward, since so many libraries have so many of the typical types of cues. So finding new ways to say new things or old things, I think is super valuable.
Cool. I'm doing about the same kind of thing. I'm kind of, one thing I was working on this morning is classical massive trap, if you will. It was the solo cello suite from Bach, the very famous
Nice.
G minor one, and just slowly bringing in bigger and bigger and bigger trap. And then there's parts later on in it where it does some stuff, and I have break beats and stuff in there. So yeah, exactly what you're saying. Classical plus trap.
Is that the do 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 do? Man, that's bold. Are you using like a public domain recording and you're chopping that up, or are you programming that with your VST?
Kind of both. I went and found, for most classical music, you can find the MIDI somewhere, and they're not really necessarily copyrighted arrangements because it's just note for note from Bach. So I will just bring it in and I will manipulate it to the way I want it to. It has to be well played. It has to have some kind of somebody has to have played it in live. It can't just be like entered into stuff. So
or taking like the Sibelius file, spit out the MIDI and call it good. Nope.
Yeah, it's not like that. It's I have to go in and manipulate it, and I do some tempo changes and all that kind of stuff. So it's half. No, it's not using anyone's recording, because I don't want to get into all that stuff right now.
No.
Gosh, we're told not to do that. I just had a library this week tell me, our position on AI, don't send us any. We do not want to hear anything that's either generated by AI, and then I have another library say the same thing, basically about samples. No samples. Not one splice loop shall you send to us. And as a matter of fact, here's some loops you can use from our library. You can use these, but you can't use any This is a BMG library. You cannot use any of your,
Can you? What about like one shots and impacts and those kind of
I
things?
don't think that's a problem. That kind of thing is different, I think.
Yeah.
I'm talking about pre-made MIDI loops, pre-made
Yeah.
samples, things like that.
Yeah.
Then I just watched FL Studio's new studio update, and all it is here's a bunch of royalty-free loops you can use to create your stuff. And I'm thinking, boy, this is taking us in a backwards way. And I know it's fun for the kids who play with this, but it's not going to take them to a place where it's going to be helpful to them if they want to sell it and stuff.
I call it a creative cul-de-sac.
Yeah, yeah.
You will run out of daylight.
Look what I made. Did you make it? So also,
It's creative, but it's not composing. So let's make sure that there's a distinction there. It's a creative act,
right,
but it's collage work. You're not. Yeah.
I've been blending many things this week. I've been blending drumline and hip hop, and so
I caught your live stream, man. Good job.
That was my first one. The sound was not great. I've got to fix that up, but I may do a little bit more of that. That was kind of fun. And I also have a series I've been doing since last year, mixing Halloween with Christmas songs, and so I've got a Halloween version of a Thanksgiving song. Actually, it's going to come out, and then it's just an album that I'm not really giving it up. It's a non-exclusive album that I put everywhere, and then anybody can use. I think Crucial Music has one or two of them, and
those seasonal cues, man, they are evergreen. I have Christmas cues that I wrote 3, 4, 5 years ago. They're still getting air. I mean, we just as we're recording this, just last night we had our 52 cues Fright Night Composer Quest live stream, and so that was we had 19 submissions for that, and those cues. We've missed the Halloween window this year, but you're not a month late. You are 11 months early.
It's going to come. It's the gift that keeps on giving every single year. Any kind of, I'm considering doing, well, I'm not considering it. I'm going to send the email around to do a little mastermind during these holiday seasons and just continue to push people about holiday music, not just Christmas, not just Halloween, but also Veterans Day or 4th of July, patriotic, and Easter, and all the different holidays. I'm telling you, a third of all the different things I get are from those kind of things.
I'm interested what a Thanksgiving cue sounds like. All that comes to mind is like Charlie Brown Thanksgiving, where they all get around the ping pong table and have Thanksgiving.
The one I just did was Over the River and Through the Woods, which is, I didn't know, but it's a Thanksgiving song. To Grandmother's House We Go.
Today I learned. Okay. No,
because
I was today years old when I realized that.
I've been looking for Thanksgiving songs, and as I looked it up, because I was trying to make sure I was totally redoing the melody in a minor key rather than major key, and for Halloween, and it's actually called Through the Wood Darkly, and it's a lot of fun. It sounds like a Tim Burton score type of thing.
Nice.
So the nightmare before. The Nightmare
Children
Before
singing
Thanksgiving.
In a minor key.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it could be a voice. Over the river and through the woods. It could literally be a voice for sure. But anyway, and then I'm actually working on bachata this week. Have you ever heard of bachata?
Nope.
It's kind
Inform
of
me.
A Spanish type of pop. And you could almost say it's a cousin to reggaeton a little bit.
Okay.
And I've heard of it a little bit, but a client has sent me a song that he is singing to his wife at their wedding, and it is in Spanish, and it is in this style, bachata or bachata. I don't know enough about it. And then I'm doing one pop song. So a lot of composing. Yes, even live composing has happened on both my channels. So I'll just want to say thanks, Dave, for being here. And I don't have a thing for this, but today's episode of this podcast is sponsored by 52 Cues, which is a great community. And I'll put the links below to go down there and see everything that's going on over there. As Dave says, we are stronger together. And you guys should go look at that community if you are interested in production music and all things production music. Dave is the man and got a great channel over there. So
appreciate that.
Go take a look at that. All right. All that business out of the way. Let's now talk about this very tiny, small thing, basic orchestration. But this is basic orchestration, especially focused on DAW composers and beat makers. We're really focused on the non-professional arranger. This is not someone who is arranging for orchestras. This is more for DAW composers that we speak to a lot, who are making production music, who are making music for any kind of use, even people who are making micro sync type things, or they're making non-exclusive things they're going to put even on Spotify or whatever. Beat makers who are, they know how to make a beat. Even FL composers want to add strings and do these kind of like dual hip hop / orchestral things sometimes. And so what we want to do in this is just go through all the sections of the orchestra and talk about them a little bit in not detail, because we only have here this little time. So let's start not at the start of where we would see a score, because at the top of any score, if you're looking at score things orchestrally, you would see the woodwinds at the top. But we're going to start with the kind of the, I don't know, the elephant in the room, which is strings. Strings are what most people think of when they think of orchestra. The first thing they think of, if you have a concert and you're trying to pretend like you have an orchestra, you'll have 5 people up on the stage playing with the track that's really playing off stage, and you've got these people playing violins and cellos. But I have started to realize the beauty of not really violins lately, but I have really been into violas lately. But let's talk real quick about the 5 main food groups of strings, which are violins 1, violins 2, violas, and basses, cellos, and then basses. And they go in size: violin, viola, cello, and basses. You know, they get bigger as they go. It's kind of like the Monty Python joke: small at one end, big in the middle. Do you know that joke?
I don't know that one.
So there is a joke about a lady who says she has a theory about dinosaurs, and she goes on and on. She goes, "It's my theory. I want to make sure you know it's my theory." And they're like, finally, after 5 minutes of saying, "It's my theory, don't steal it," and they're like, "We're not going to steal your theory. And my theory about dinosaurs is that they get small at one end, and they're very much bigger in the middle, and then small again at the other end." She goes, "And that's my theory, which is mine." So that was
I don't know how I missed that. I'm a huge Monty Python fan.
Just a little skit. And so yeah, violins, violas, cellos, and basses, they are larger each time. When you are programming lead violins, and we don't want to get you started on solo lead violins, because you have a video that people can go check out.
Yeah, that's Spitfire, first violins from Abbey Road. Yeah.
About Spitfires.
Anyway.
Yes, and Spitfire actually put out a whole catalog, a whole $500. Is it $500? Something like that.
It's $450.
Yeah, $450 plug-in just for first violins, which are, granted, usually the lead in most many orchestral pieces. If you have a, I think I left a comment in there, is if there is a lead instrument in the orchestra consistently, it's probably the first violins. So when you're working with first violins, explain what you're doing with them, Spitfire or not.
Well, yeah, Spitfire. This is, of course, assuming that you're working in the DAW with a plugin, a VST, that has them split out. So many of the libraries that we use, whether it's Albion One, Project Sam's, Symphobia, whatever, they're going to be ensemble patches, which do not have isolated violin, 1, 2, viola, cello, and then the basses. They're not going to be separated like that. And so you can only kind of create that split, but there's going to be overlap, and the sound of a violin is different from the sound of a viola. I mean, it's just fundamentally a different sound. And so when you get something like BBCSO or LA scoring strings, they have all these instruments kind of broken out, then it's important that you are approaching each one as its own thing, which takes time.
Yeah.
It can be exhausting to program each line by itself, but that's kind of the space you need to get into. So for me, I think of violins as doing a lot of the major melodic lifting, but like you, I love me some viola. I got to tell
Boy.
you, I like just kind of the mid range. It's a little bit closer to the range of the human voice,
Hmm.
right? And I like giving the viola some love.
Hmm.
When I was taking my music education classes, I took I took high strings. You either could take high strings or low strings. I took high strings, and I loved the viola. The violin was just too screechy.
Hmm.
My apologies to all you violin players out there, but the viola, and I don't know, viola players are just cool. Every violist I've ever known has just been really kind of cool, down to earth, super easy to get along with. Right? They're like, I don't know, viola is like the drummers of the of the string section.
Yeah,
They're unsung heroes, but they do so much of the heavy lifting.
they're the clarinets of the woodwinds. They're the trombones of of the brass. They're, I mean, they're, if any, they're of all the second place people. They are them. But before I get to violas, I just want to say about violins one and two. Someone was asking me this recently, and I was telling them that violins one are usually the star, the top lead if there's an arrangement going on many times, and then violins two are the second lead, the harmony to that lead a lot of times, or the strengthening of that lead from what I've understood
Yep,
to in
yep.
use.
Yeah, same way. I do the same thing.
And then violas get us in this space between violin, like Dave said, high, can be screechy, can be harsh, and the viola gets us into a different place. This is the alto. Again, another second place person. The alto in the women's choir. In the choir, the women altos always don't get the fun parts. They get the worst parts,
Yep.
actually.
One, 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 two, one. Right, they're just singing around about a third.
But
Yep.
the real secret, and we'll get into this as we get into all these instruments more, is in the articulations. When you can start playing spiccato violas, ooh, there's some interesting things in there. Or pizzicato, anything is always awesome. But viola is like a small cello. It's got that kind of range where its range isn't as big as the cello, but it's still got a lot of that stuff. A lot of the stuff you hear in soundtracks. I don't know. Did you watch the Ahsoka show that was
Mhm.
just on recently? Dun
Yeah.
dun dun. Her theme was very much. There's a couple of themes that are like using that now. Evil, which is a show on CBS, used this kind of spiccato violas and cellos type of score. It's very popular right now, it seems, that very rough spiccato sound. But I've been going to violas first a lot lately for some of the Christmas stuff that I've been doing, and starting there, and then I'll go and add strings. Or sometimes I'll go cellos and basses and then add strings last of all things, which is sometimes interesting. But violas can give you a lot of meat in that hot mid to high range, mid range, mid to high, and you can do a lot of neat things with them. And if you think of them as like a utility player, not just support to the violins, because really violins two is support to the violins one in my mind, and violas can be something unique, and you should let them be unique, because what else they got to do? Otherwise, they're going to feel bad. You don't want to make the violas feel bad.
No, they're super nice people. They're nice people. Violists are nice people well, if you choose to play viola, you are consciously choosing to play an instrument which is relegated to a supporting role,
Hmm.
and you have poured your life into being excellent in support of others. Whereas the violins, they're the rock stars, right? They're the lead guitarists. They're
Yeah.
the lead singers, you know. And
Yeah.
so which is why I feel like as a drummer, I resonate with violas, because we are playing a supportive role so much.
Okay, so if strings one and two, or sorry, violins one and two are the guitar players,
Hmm.
and violists are the drummers, then cellos are definitely also
They're
guitar players. They're
no, they're the keyboardists,
keyboard.
right? When you have like a Shredder McShreddington on the
Yeah.
front of the stage,
Yeah.
with the foot up on there, but the keyboard every now and then gets a little solo, gets a
Yeah.
little action. Everybody
And has a way
recognizes the
bigger range
keyboard
of things
player.
it could do.
Super big range, and man, if you get a keyboardist talking about keyboard, there will talk your freaking ear off about keyboard. No, cellists are keyboardists, and bass players are bass players.
Yeah,
Super
exactly.
cool. They'll go with whatever. Yeah, whatever, man. They're just Yep. They're
Yeah,
just
and
minding their own business, holding down the bottom.
so the cellos can do a lot just because of the range of the instrument. It goes from very low to very high, and so there's a whole lot you can do with it. All the articulations, and again, I can't stress enough, if you are someone who is just getting into orchestration, trying to make orchestral stuff, they don't just go like this all day. Okay, there's lots of other things that they do, plucking and different kinds of plucking, Bartok plucking and all this other kinds of plucking. They're hitting the violin with all sorts of the bow, the wooden side, the other side. They're playing spiccato, they're playing marcato, they're playing all sorts of pizzicato where they're plucking, and they're doing all sorts of things. And so one of the great things about Logic, are you a Logic guy? I can't remember.
Oh yeah.
So
Oh
I
yeah.
do most of my sketching in Logic. And a lot of times I won't even go to my other libraries if Logic's got a decent sketch sound to start with. Just especially if I'm not at home, if I'm out and about, or if I'm at school and all I've got is Logic and what it has. It's surprising how much you can do with Logic, really. But not to harp on that, but they've done a good job, especially with their string sounds. They could do better with their woodwinds, but with their string sounds, with their articulations in their strings, it's pretty amazing. And so
Yep.
I will start there and find interesting articulations, and then I will go into Spitfire, or I'll go to Musio, which I've started to use a lot now, which is a whole other conversation. But and Cine Winds or Cine whatever, which is included in Musio. And I will supplement what I've already done, because it doesn't sound terrible what I did in Logic. And so I will supplement these different things. So that's violins, which is the lead, violas, which is the kind of the support underneath the violins that you can do a lot of things with, the cellos, which is really the keyboard players who have a tremendous range and they can do a lot of different things, and then the basses. Basses probably aren't as flexible. They bow, they pluck, and they have spiccato stuff, which does sound pretty interesting. But your bass is going to do what your bass usually does. Your bass usually holds down the bottom end, and
Yeah.
so
Basses, if you're talking articulations, there's a technique called colegno, which is when you slap the strings with the wooden side of the bow.
Yep.
And if you've ever been watching an action movie or a horror movie and you hear that clack, right, that really aggressive clack, that is, chances are it's going to be a coligno attack from the low end of the string section. Really,
Yeah.
really handy.
And you can find that articulation in most libraries now. It seems
Yep.
to be very popular.
Well, and that's what you're paying for when Spitfire asks you for nearly 5 bills for one string section.
Yeah.
That's what you're paying for. All those articulations
Right.
and everything.
Exactly. All right. Well, that's enough about strings for now. Certainly not enough. I remember when I took orchestration, and we had one semester to do every section of the orchestra, and we haven't even got into things that aren't violins, violas, cellos, or basses. There are lots of other viola da gamba and all these other instruments that you could look at in the family, but we're not going to have time to talk about all those here. But I thought, man, you could just do a semester on each section of the orchestra, and it would be awesome, I thought. All right, so let's move on to the next family, and that is the woodwinds family. And this is going to cover everything from flutes, clarinets, oboes, English horns, bassoons, and saxes. And that doesn't even get started describing all the different kinds of things. We're not probably going to talk about like bass clarinets and piccolos and
Contrabassoon
and all that stuff, and the billion saxes that exist. So, and all of them that play in all the clarinets that play that are in different keys and all that kind of stuff. So, but let's start with flutes. And again, similar to the string section, the flutes are the ones. They're the stars. They're the Beyonce out in front of the stage, getting the first flute play. I mean, they even look a little snooty with their little holding the flute up like this. Look at me, I'm a flute player. So I use flutes. You got to be careful with flutes. I think there is a tendency in programming in DAWs to play too low on the flute because you can. Luckily, most of the libraries that come out now are within the range of what the instrument does. They put you in the range and they stop it where it really doesn't go down below it, and they stop it where it shouldn't go higher, really.
Yeah.
And so we're sometimes protected from our own ignorance that way by a lot of the programs now. But I see flutes as the star of the woodwinds, and certainly things that lead. And the piccolo, which is the higher, smaller flute, it's very shrill, so it's hard to use a lot. But the flute itself is a lovely instrument, and sometimes doubles the violins and or harmonizes with the violins sometimes. But I like to use it all the time, but it usually does have the lead in a lot of things I'm doing. What about you?
Yeah, for me, woodwinds are some of the toughest to program. And the reason is because anytime that you are looking to virtually recreate an instrument that is made with a human with their breath, then you introduce so many nuances and variables that are nearly impossible to pull off virtually. One of the reasons that there are a billion piano libraries is it's a very straightforward instrument to sample. Percussion, extremely straightforward. I can go get a break drum sample library that will sound indistinguishable from me banging on a break drum with the hammer myself. However, a good woodwind instrument, same with brass. It's really, really, really tough to pull off, which is why the library that I use is Vienna Symphonic Library. I only really use it for its woodwinds because of the legatos and the transitions and everything else. So the flutes, I do agree with you in that a lot of flutes like to live in the low end. I think that's because so many of these libraries just sound terrible up high. Even Vienna, like the high flute. I'm just like, no, nobody's looking for that. And in the modern media landscape, especially my world, which is production music, there's not a ton of call for like a woodwind trio sound. I'm not saying it's not out there, but not a lot of reality TV shows are using these nice Debussy inspired flute lines. Right. Yeah. And so you just have to be careful. What I tend to reach for, if I'm not reaching for a concert flute, is there's a flute by Embertone called Jubal Flute, which is this little wooden flute that they sampled. They like hyper sampled. It sounds amazing. Has a super short range, but it sounds like talking in a box, man. It sounds so good. It sounds like something straight from Lord of the Rings. So that's my go-to flute if I'm not looking to recreate a perfect symphonic flute.
I love the flute, and Dave brought up a good point. And what I've learned to do, both with brass and woodwinds now, is literally breathe with what I'm playing. In other words, if I can't blow as long as I'm playing, I have to stop what I'm playing and take a breath. So if I'm playing a flute line that goes da 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 da, you have to, and you know what? If you want to really make a realistic flute, here's a little bit of extra for you now. Hook up your mic, play your flute part, and breathe with it. And you will fool everybody. That even a Logic flute sound, if you are playing that flute sound and breathing with it, most people will just imagine it's a real flute.
My shakuhachi, which I'm learning to play, has taught me that. Actually, I had a drum teacher in my graduate program, and he said, don't solo. You have to breathe as you're soloing. If you are playing, you have to be exhaling. If you need to inhale because you're out of air, stop playing. Yeah. And so it forces, as a drummer, which there's nothing physiologically stopping me from playing nonstop, but it creates phrasing and it helps to bridge the uncanny valley.
Yeah. Yeah. Because strings can play this all day without stopping. They can just bow back and forth as long as they want to. But everything else is going to have breaths. Just like a choir is going to have to take breaths. And so they stagger breathing if they want to keep it all going at the same time. So now let's talk about my other favorite instrument right now that I love, that, again, is usually second place in most people's hearts, if not third or fourth or fifth, especially if your name was Mozart early in his career, the clarinets. I have fallen in love recently with the clarinet as well as the viola. And a lot of times, if I'm putting solos together and I need a woodwind solo, I'll admit I go to bassoon first. It's just I love the bassoon, but the clarinet is also a really lovely instrument to play. It's got a lovely range because it's not too high or shrill. I mean, you can play very high, but most of it is in alto's range a lot of the time. And so it's a nice thing to play a solo in where you want that, where you'd usually have an alto girl singer singing. And I've really had a lot of fun with clarinets. I'm having trouble finding a great clarinet sample.
Yeah, VSL, baby. VSL clarinet is so stinking good.
Almost everything else is kind of stinky. Logic ends up being about the best. I think I found another, and I don't have very high libraries yet. I have, except for Albion 1, I don't really have anything that anyone would consider high-end library. So a lot of times I'm mixing things, and I'm also big. One thing we haven't talked about with strings and woodwinds so far is that when I do a string section, I will also, or a viola section or a cello section, I'll usually also do a cello solo along with the section. So like there's a first cellist playing that you hear, and that gives you a little bit more authenticity to the especially if you're dealing with something like BBCSO, where you haven't paid for it, so you've just got the Discover one, and it's so verby and kind of bland. It's fun. It's great. Gosh, I've heard people do great things with it who don't have anything else, and it's a great thing for young composers who don't have any money to get something. So I'm not going to disparage it, but especially with woodwinds, I like to have a flute section with a solo flute also playing along with that flute section. I think it provides a lot of realism.
Yeah, layering is super important, not just because of what you're talking about, but it creates a more unique sound, that is just your own. My word of caution for you is make sure that you dry out as much as you can so that you don't have competing reverbs. So get as dry of a signal from your plugin as you can, and then put one unifying reverb. So if you're in a contact library, you can actually stack them within the contact library. If you're in Logic, you can use a track stack or a plugin like Unity. I think there's a plugin where you can kind of create your own track stacks within multiple plugins. Anyway,
yeah, track stacking has become very big with in Logic for me. But I am a big believer in what you just said. I use I'm a big fan of Space Designer in Logic, and I use one of the things I use in there is a lovely verb called scoring stage. I end up using that an awful lot because it just has the right sound of an orchestral scoring stage for me. And so I will turn off all other reverbs and only use that for the most part for all instruments. And it's tough right now because I'm getting ready to review Musio. I don't know if you've heard of Musio, but or send us samples and stuff like that.
Oh yeah. They have a $50 a year edu discount. Yeah, I'm all over that.
You may have even told me about this, but I have it. And the problem with it is I can't get the reverb out of it. And I've talked to them about it. I've said, you have a place that I can dial down the reverb, but the reverb's still there. All the room is still there. I need not the room
that's because it's recorded in a space, and so and they're not like contact mics, or they're not like super close mics. So you're not hearing any additional reverb. You're just hearing the space that it was recorded in,
which still doesn't help.
Yeah,
it doesn't help. All right, so moving on in the woodwinds while we're here, I love the clarinets because they can do a lot of neat moving lines inside of things that you don't realize how utilitarian. How much of a great utility the clarinets can be. Oboe and English horns are double reed instruments. They're the little small, hard to play reeds that are hard to blow through, and luckily there's only one or two per orchestra, and it's mainly because they just probably can't teach that many people to play them well. But they're fairly hard to play, and that's the one thing I remember from orchestras, all the squeaking from the oboes, and they'd be like, sorry. And
they look at the horn like it's the horn's fault. Oh, what happened?
What's going on?
Nope.
There must be a bad read.
It was input error.
So the oboe and the English horn, I'll kind of talk about them together because they're similar sounds. I go back and forth for which one fits at the time. It's kind of like, which color do you like better? I don't know if I know a big, huge difference between them. And I don't know if I can always tell them apart if I'm listening, just blind. If
Yeah,
someone,
for me, the English horn sounds much more nasally. It sounds, yeah, more like if you were playing English horn or oboe like this, then that's English
and it
horn.
already sounds like that.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. I like the English horn because I think the oboe is there's like maybe an octave where it sounds non-threatening.
Yeah.
Anything beyond that, and then it can really just a
Yes.
little oboe. The reason there are only one oboe is because they're freaking
They
loud.
cut through
They're
everything.
really, really loud,
Yeah.
and that whatever physics is involved in cutting through,
Yeah.
the harmonics will shred any mix.
Absolutely. Yeah. So oboes and English horns can be good for certain lines, especially little melodic lines. You need to introduce a melody. It's really great for that. And then
Yeah,
we
if
get
you want a master class in oboe, listen to Alan Silvestri's usage of the oboe in Castaway. Right at the end, when spoilers, he finally releases Wilson.
wait,
Right,
wait, what?
the volleyball
I
that
haven't
has
watched
been
it
his
yet.
only friend for years. He finally releases him. He's like, "I'm sorry, Wilson," and then I get chills to think about it. There's a single comes in. Oh my gosh, that is the best cinematic use of oboe I have ever heard. So check it out, Castaway.
And then we get to oboe's big brother cousin, the bassoon, which is
The cello of the
the
woodwinds.
cello of the woodwinds, a very big range and a lot of things you could do with it, and probably one of my favorite solo instruments to use in the whole orchestra, especially for dramedy. If you want to have dramedy, bassoon will just get you there fast. Pizzicato strings and bassoon, and you're on your way to making
Yep.
a dramedy cue.
Yeah, and if you want to hear, listen, check out the opening passage of Sacre du Printemps, aka Rite
Oh,
of Spring from Stravinsky,
yeah.
and that bassoon. That's a masterclass in bassoon writing right there.
Well, I just love it because it can be an accompaniment, boom, boom, boom type of thing that adds a lot of personality, or it can just be the it could be the solo voice. It just does so much stuff, and it's beautiful, and you could do low, fast, slow, everything with it.
Yep.
And I do have a couple good. I have an orchestral tools bassoon, and I have a lot of different bassoons now, but not too awfully hard to replicate. Similar to the upright bass. Jazz upright bass. It's a fairly, it seems to be a sample that translates well for sampling.
Yeah, and in that same VSL library that has the stellar clarinet also has an amazing contrabassoon,
Ooh.
and I have used that with great effect in drama. It's like, the sound in Christmas Story, when the bumpus hounds, boom, 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 right? That's a contrabassoon, and that's what that sounds like. It's very, very useful for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and the bassoon family, gosh, we could go for an hour or a class just talking about the bassoon family. And I think we did one night. We just went into the bassoons, and there's all sorts of bassoons.
Yep.
And then you have the sax family, which the sax, alto, tenor, baritone, any kind of saxophone you want to talk about, they are really not necessarily always involved in the orchestra that you see on stage and that you hear in orchestral music. And I'm not sure why. What's your thought on that?
No, I think it's late to the party.
Yeah.
The same reason drum set isn't there.
Yeah.
It's not. It's just a relatively. If we're talking, cor inglés versus electric guitar, it's much further along in the orchestral development, and it kind of got pigeonholed as a popular instrument, popular music instrument.
Yeah.
Much like the vibraphone, and I'm sure we'll circle back to that. But the vibraphone, when it first came out, was pigeonholed as a sound effect. So it wasn't until Lionel Hampton comes along and says, "This is legit," that people go, "Oh." But in the meantime, I don't know, it kind of gets unfairly, the saxophone gets kind of unfairly maligned in orchestral circles, and it feels like it's also ran, like it's not really
You
invited to
know,
the
and
party.
it might be an opportunity actually if you are someone who wants to arrange for orchestra to arrange with a full sax section or different sax players, because I'm sure there are orchestras around the school orchestras everywhere that have saxophone players with nothing to do, and there might be band directors looking for scores with saxes.
I'm trying to think back to my college days. We didn't have saxophone in our orchestra. In our woodwind ensemble, yeah, we totally had in our not woodwind, but our wind ensemble. But our orchestra, unless we were doing like a Gershwin something or other,
Yeah.
or I'm not sure there was much sax.
Yeah, it's definitely a woodwind or instrument,
Oh
but
yeah,
maybe you hear it more in band music than you hear it in
oh
orchestra
yeah.
music. So if you're marching band, of course, there's going to be saxes and things like that in there. But they do a lot of things, but we're used to them as solo instruments probably more than anything, or section instruments in jazz or pop or something like that. So, but they have been and can be in the orchestra. All right, let's move on now. We're making good time. We're moving up to brass, and this is where I come from. I was a trombone player, but first, let's kind of start with the one that's nearest the woodwinds, and sometimes is even involved in woodwind quintets and things like that, is the horn, often known as the French horn, and a really beautiful instrument that plays a unique role, because a lot of times I will mix horn and woodwinds and no other horns, and I don't know why, but it just fits with woodwinds really well. What's your thoughts
Yeah, I
on
mean,
that?
I mean, Horn was on Kind of Blue by Miles Davis. I mean, it's a super versatile instrument, from John Williams to Miles Davis, and it's one of those sounds which is super portable. If you want something to sound epic and big and orchestral, sprinkle in a few strings, some cello and horn, and boom, throw cello and horn onto a hip hop beat, and you've got an orchestral hip hop beat.
Yeah,
And so I would recommend highly the Cinebrass two horn
yeah,
ensemble.
it's very nice
It's like John Williams like
in a
in a
box.
VST. It sounds great right out of the box.
Yeah, horns are beautiful, and they're useful for soaring lines, but they're also useful for muted accompaniment, and so a lot of uses for the French horn. Trumpets are get back into the role of the star of the brass, just like the flutes are for the woodwinds, just like the violins are for the strings. Trumpets are usually a lot of times have the lead lines. If there are brass lead lines, you will hear that in the trumpet line because they are higher. They're not, I don't know if they're, I guess they can be as high as horns, but they're just such a different tone and much more, again, like the flutes, like what you talked about, the oboes, very cutting instruments.
Hmm. Yeah,
So,
no, the trumpet range, yeah, exceeds the horns range
yeah,
for sure.
and a little trumpet goes a long way. There's probably only two trumpets or so in an orchestra, because there doesn't need to be more than that. And as a matter of fact, the strings. There's a reason. If you're looking at like the plugin of BBCSO, you'll see that the strings and the woodwinds all kind of sit up front. So because if you're not miking anyone, you've got to hear them over the loud horns and loud percussion. The percussion's in the back, and even the oboe is somewhat in the back behind things and things like that. So you've got all the strings kind of up front, and then the woodwinds kind of behind them. And the woodwind sections aren't as big, by the way, as the violin sections. So you're usually at a 3-to-1 strings to woodwinds ratio, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and to
And
that
brass too.
point, when you are programming and you're going for a realistic performance in an orchestral cue or a track or whatever, make sure that you keep that in mind. Like the flute, unless you're writing a flute concerto, the flute should not stick out of the mix.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to sound unnatural. Your clarinet shouldn't pop out of the mix unless everything else gets out of the way. But if you have full orchestra, then you can clearly hear the oboe. The oboe's too loud.
Yeah, unless it's a solo part. But
Right.
if you're talking about if we're 2D, if
Y-
we're
Yeah,
everybody's
if you're
playing,
mixing the orchestra,
yeah,
and the woodwinds should absolutely blend in, because there's only one oboe player against 20 violins.
hmm and two flute players, maybe three,
Yep.
and
Maybe
same with
alto, and
clarinets.
one of them's doubling on alto or bass flute or something.
Two bassoons, two clarinets, or maybe more clarinets. I don't know, but anyway, yeah, we tend to think as all these are the same number of players, and it's not like concert band where we had big sections of everybody.
We have as many as signed up,
Yeah, right.
as many
Yeah.
sixth graders.
Can you switch from tuba to oboe? We need an oboist. Anyway, so actually, it was backwards. Usually, they switch the oboist over to tuba. So that is the trumpets, and then the trombones are also kind of the cellos of the orchestra here. The bassoons, kind of, but they're more for dark color. Again, trombones rarely have their own, unless it's a, unless it's some kind of big announcing type of things. The trombones are going to be more filler type of instruments, and I know because I was a trombone player for all of my young life in high school and orchestra, and so I have a special place in my heart for the trombones. Or as who said that about the trombones? Was it Bartok? No, it was. I can't remember who said it, but he says, "Don't look at the trombones; it only encourages them."
I played trombone in high school jazz band because we had 3 drummers and only 1 drum set. And so either I sat there and like played tambourine, did nothing, or learned trombone. So I picked up trombone. I was trombone 6.
Nice. Well, I was close to
last.
first chair. I was first chair a few times, but trombone is an instrument that plays about what a man sings. Its highest notes are up where a high baritone is gonna sing, and so when we get into tenor notes, that's where probably likely you'll move into low trumpet notes and things like that. But trombones they can play very low, and the bass trombone is actually sometimes an instrument that you will see in the orchestra a lot that covers some ground between the trombones and the tuba. Another instrument that is between the trombones and the tuba is the euphonium. Again, not always something that's seen in most, similar to saxes, not always seen in the orchestra, but and maybe that's something that a trombone player could switch off of. I mean,
Yeah, it's like a tiny tuba. You see them all over wind ensembles, but orchestra euphonium is probably about as in my experience, about as common as you would see a sax.
think of a euphonium like a trombone sound, but with valves and a little bassier, maybe. But the euphoniums always sat right next to it, or the baritones, as they call them in high school, always sat next to the trombones, between the trombones and the tubas. And there was only a couple of baritones. And then we get to the tuba, which is a very useful instrument, and the bass also, along with the basses. Not a lot of tubas in the orchestra, probably 2. I would say maybe 1. I don't know how many are usual, but the tuba does a lot of different kinds of things as far as bass. It's useful for very just like the basses. I mean, you just have to think of it like a bass, except it does have a lot of personality, and it's and another instrument that's fairly easy to fake as far as samples. You can usually find a decent tuba thing that gets you that sound if you're trying to get a tuba. Probably any stock tuba is going to be close to what you need.
Yeah. Yeah, I reach for, again, Cinebrass, and Cinebrass also has an instrument which is great called the chimbasso. So imagine if somebody took a euphonium and kind of stretched it out into a trombone, you're going to get chimbasso.
Yeah.
And so if you're wanting that splatty kind of brahmy type of a sound, then the chimbasso is great for that.
Crazy. My cat has been nuts today. This cat is crazy. Yeah, I just learned about the chimbasso. I haven't really worked with it much, but I'm always interested in different textures and sounds that no one else is using and not using a lot. I like to be unique and different, and I love things like that. So speaking of unique and different and the freaks of the orchestra, let's talk about the percussion section. And now this I know is something that you can speak on a lot because this is your background. the bad boys of the
Yep.
orchestra standing back there messing about, making plans to go out and smoke behind the building afterwards, and all that kind of stuff.
It
And
sounds like that you need to go talk to somebody about this. Sounds like you're harboring some childhood trauma.
there's some therapy that needs to happen
Yeah, it's
because of some
because the
things.
trombone players are always right in front of the percussion section, usually in front of the timpani,
Well, actually,
right?
they weren't in my band, but the percussion was over behind the woodwinds and things. But and I shouldn't say anything because the trombones are probably the next biggest troublemakers
Oh
after
my
the
gosh.
percussion
Oh, dude.
players.
Yeah, you want to talk about smoking weed out back. Those are the trombone players that come at me. No, the drummers are percussionists are either major music nerds or they're these are broad strokes, folks. Don't come at me if you send an email at makemusickandcome.com. This is just my experience. Either you have the kind of listen, Billy, just stay quiet, and I'll point at you when I want you to take this stick and hit that thing. I'll point at you. Or you have like the music nerds. And so in the percussion section, you have pitched and non-pitched percussion. I think that's the first thing to keep in mind.
Mhm.
So the pitched percussion is going to be your mallet instruments, your marimba, your xylophone, your glockenspiel. Even the celeste falls under the percussion realm, which is a teeny tiny glockenspiel that you play with keys, right? It's the proto electric piano.
That's what you're used to hearing at Christmas for
100%.
fairy.
Yep. Yep.
Whatever the fairy.
Also have
is.
tubular bells, and you have timpani. Those are the pitched percussion.
And vibraphone.
Then you have the yes, vibraphone. Yep, which is I have one right up there. And then you have the non-pitched percussion. It takes the form of battery, which is going to be your drums, your bass drums, toms, snare drums, and those types of things. And then you have your cymbals, which is going to be all of your metal sounds, and whether you have a suspended cymbal that you can roll, whoosh, have basically that kind of sound, or you can have crash cymbals, aka piatti. If you're looking for the nice Italian music theory type of term for it, it's called a piatti. It's two plates, metal plate, and I think piatti is plate in Italian. They clang together. And then you have your other auxiliary percussion. These are going to be your shakers, your sleigh bells, your triangles, your wood blocks, castanets, cabasa, clave, all of that other stuff. And so in my experience, they're the classificate. You have your mallet kids, like they usually the ones that have piano lessons and those kind of things. You have the timpani guy, and that was me. I was timpani dude in high school and in college because I could hear intervals. I played trombone like in the jazz band, so I knew how to read bass clef and all of that stuff. And then you have the battery folks, and these are like you're usually like in high school, it's like the drumline kids, like it's super serious. They're going to sit there and they're going to count like relentlessly for one bass hit on the Gran Casa 65-inch bass drum, which will rattle the license plates. And then you have the aux percussion kids, the Timmy, I'll point at you when I want you to hit the wood block type of folks. Yep, exactly.
I think for our DAW composers, the first ones you need to know about are number one, timpani, and number two, probably cymbals in a way that if you want the original OG riser, it's this. And Logic's got a great suspended cymbal roll like that.
It has one.
It has
one in the orchestral kit.
In the orchestral
on,
kit.
B flat too, right? I think.
Yep. B flat.
Yep. It has one.
Yeah, and but it works. It works great. I use it so much. And because nobody really goes, is that a good cymbal roll? Because no one thinks about cymbal rolls. To them, again, it's a riser. Sometimes I'll use it with a riser at the same time. But I tried to use a Musio one this morning. Didn't work as well. Actually, I used both, I think.
Yeah,
but,
I just, having been a lifelong drummer since 1985, that's when my cymbal collection started. I am lousy with cymbals, so I'll just record one. It's so much easier.
Yeah.
And if you are using a suspended cymbal roll, treat it like a riser. There is rising energy and falling energy, and where the peak of that waveform crests, that's the bar line.
It's 1,
2, 3, 4, and then it releases, right? So treat it like a riser you would in an
And
EDM
let it
code.
ring.
Hmm.
Don't just go shh and then and cut off unless you're looking for that kind of thing, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that and the timpani, which is the that'll make you sound orchestral really fast if you are playing timpani. And remember that the timpani usually only is going to play about 3 or 4 notes at a time. Larger orchestras have 4 timpani, maybe 5 sometimes, but they're tuned for a certain number of notes per song. Is that right?
I mean, yeah, there's,
I mean, I know you can change the pedals
yeah,
and stuff
accomplished
mid song.
timpanists deal in intervallic, right? So you might play this one note, and then in 5 measures you have to change that note. I would say just be sure and treat it like a double bass instrument, right? It's not fast moving, and I'm looking at you like James Swearingen. Uh, your your band kids are going to appreciate that joke. Your old band kids are going to appreciate James
I
Swearingen.
don't have any old
But
band kids.
but no, it's usually playing roots. Treat it like the bass version of the tubular bells or the concert chimes. You can't go super fast, and you have a very limited range and a limited number of notes.
Yeah, I try to stay on 1, 4, and 5 and things like that. With timpani, I don't do doom 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 doom.
Yeah,
I'm not
walking the
doing.
bass line on the timpani.
And again, we're talking to people who may not know these things. They may not
Yeah.
know how actual timpani work, and there are 4 physical timpani all tuned to like 4 different notes that they're going to be using. Now, yes, in the middle of the tune, when they're not working, they can go in there and tune it to a new note they might need later. But it's not that fast. They can't just play chromatically down the scale. They can only play a note. So use it for your boom 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 boom. You can use it for 1, 4, and 5 really easily. And there are different sounds for timpani for hitting it as a boom and rolling it. A lot of different libraries have several timpani rolls that you combine with hits and things like that.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
I think I mentioned those mainly because if you're a beat maker and you're wanting to sound orchestral really quick, we're trying to give you some thoughts behind each of these things.
Yep. And I
Snare,
would say also tubular bells. If you want something to
yeah,
sound epic,
yeah.
big chimes, tubular bells on tonic or on the roots of the chords is going to, and a lot of space.
Hmm.
A little bit of that goes a long way,
Yeah.
and they ring for days. So
And they
give
cut.
yourself plenty of room. Yes, they do.
They cut really well. So does the triangle. If you like to use the triangle in any genre, not just orchestral, watch your triangle because it will cut through and bother people and drill into people's brains faster than anything. So that triangle part can be way back in the mix. So we'll hear it. Don't worry.
Yeah. It's like a fine cumin. It tastes great in moderation, but too much of it, and you have a whole dish that just tastes like
And
too
a
much
long
cumin.
night.
Right.
Um, and a hard next day. Okay, so moving past the percussion, and these are both probably related to the percussion family, is we have the harp, which is kind of in a land of its own. And one thing I didn't ever know about the harp when I learned orchestration was the fact that it had 7 pedals. I had
Hmm.
no idea that it had to do different pedals to play different notes. It can play chromatically. It's just a lot of work.
Yeah, yeah. It looks like they're flying a helicopter, man.
or a bicycle. They're like having
Yeah.
to do these pedals and play at the same time. So it's a beautiful instrument. It's a beautiful instrument for glissandos leading into places. It kind of goes along with your timpani when you're leading into sections or your cymbal roll, but also just lovely pick lines or melody lines that it plays along with, or little different little arpeggios and things that happen during that is great for harp. And does that physically fit into the percussion family, the harp?
No, I mean, well, it's technically it's a chordophone if we're talking, musicologically speaking, and so it wouldn't be a percussion; it'd be a plucked instrument, more
There we
similar
go.
to a
That makes
guitar
sense.
or lute.
But it's in a
But yeah,
playing.
and good. It's really easy to find good harp sounds. Chances are your stock
Yeah,
instrument is a good. Like Logic's harp is stellar.
it's
It's
great.
like Logic's marimba is
Yeah,
absolutely stellar.
yeah,
Logic's tubular bells stellar.
yeah,
Celeste still my
yeah.
go-to Celeste. So
Absolutely. And that's what's great about Logic. People say, why do you? Because I think all the sounds that come with it are just so useful. I mean, it's not that
Mhm.
they are the greatest sound on earth, but they're extremely useful. And if you are, and like I said, that's how I a lot of times will just sketch out little orchestral pieces, little dramedy
Yep.
pieces and stuff.
Dulcimer also, real stock Logic Dulcimer is fantastic, but
Dude,
harp is so useful. It's useful like intention cues. It's useful for like fantasy and magical type of cues. But yeah, I use harp a lot.
and I have piano on here, although that is not necessarily a stock piano, a stock orchestral element. Piano, a lot of times, is the lead if it's anything along with orchestra. It's usually
I don't know.
there.
Spitfire released their BBCSO piano. I could have done a whole video on that. Like, who's looking for this? Like,
You should have done a video comparing. I almost did a video. I think I did one day compare the Discover Spitfire BBCSO piano to Logic's piano, which I think is not great sounding like the Yamaha or sounding,
yeah.
and Logic killed it as
I,
far
I,
as
I I did do a video comparing like 11 piano VSTs, and I
yeah,
used the same MIDI across,
yeah,
and the Steinway Grand from Logic absolutely held up.
yeah,
Also, Sanjay C has a stellar video, and he
yeah,
uses Ableton, so he brings Ableton stock. Yeah, it's
yeah.
not hard to make a good piano. Now, if you want a forensically sampled piano, Logic's not your. But
No.
if you need to know, if you need 18 round robins from the pedal noise, then Logic is not the way to do that. But you can find those. And
I've become a
parenthetically,
big Keyscape fan. I was an Ivory person for a long time. I really liked Ivory, and that was my main go-to. But I fell into the Keyscape
Keyscape is
universe,
great.
and I'm fine with it. I know a lot of people who also swear by the sampled. I mean the modeled one. I can't remember the name of it right now. It's modeled. And you would know the name if I said it, but a lot of people, like you said, Sanjay C. I'll try to remember to put that link down. Even though this is an orchestral type of thing, and I still have percussion up on here, is because the piano is literally
Yeah.
kind of a percussion instrument.
It's one of those weird kind of, is it a percussion instrument or instrument? You're not plucked, it's not bowed.
Yeah.
It's a chordophone, but it's a chordophone struck with a hammer, but the hammer is due to a key press. Yeah, people
Well,
are still arguing about it.
the main things, beat makers and composers on DAWs, I wanted you to remember were strings and the woodwind section. I'll have these all like timestamped below so you can go back and listen back through this, because I think knowing what some of these things do, we've just barely touched on what everything does here. Because this, like I said, I could have taken 4 semesters of orchestration and loved it, and I wish we had. But and inside of that orchestration, we had to do reductions and all sorts of stuff inside of that, in addition to learning about all the instruments and stuff. So
Well, and the last thing I will say is, when you hear of somebody saying, sketch something out, when you hear John Williams composing, what he is doing is he is composing usually in a piano.
mhm.
Usually like stems up, stems down on the treble, stems up, stems down, and then he will take it or give it to an orchestrator who will then distribute those note choices across the orchestration. And where I see a ton of students miss the mark is where they might write something for strings, and it's like all of the strings, it's like 8 notes,
Yeah,
and then wholesale copy and paste that
yeah.
to the violins,
I used to do
and
it.
and then all of the brass, and you end up with this super dense, chunky, not to mention impossible to mix orchestration. But if you have 8 notes, keep in mind you can distribute 1 note to the violin 1 note to the violin 2, and so everybody is collectively bringing an individual note to create a greater whole.
Yeah.
But just wholesale copying and pasting entire regions that have these super dense voicings is one way to sound, well, not to put too fine a point on it, to sound kind of amateur.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did that for years. And the one thing I learned in doing either reductions from orchestra down to piano or piano up to orchestra is that you have to take the pieces of the different melodies, and you take that melody and you assign it only to violins 1 and maybe the flutes, and then you take the harmonies and you assign those to the violas and the clarinets, and then you take the middle ground, the chords and stuff, and you distribute those through other instruments, the cellos and the basses and the trombones and all that kind of stuff. And you'll find if you it does take a while. It's
Hmm.
not like fast.
Nope.
That's why sometimes you just have to work on I'm getting ready to do a video on my assembly line approach. Yeah, I'm sure everybody, you work this way too. I'll bring a song up, I'll start it, then it'll go down the assembly. I'll get back to it with the next bit of stuff and the next bit of stuff, because you could spend all day just doing the woodwinds. And so it's okay if it takes a long time, because it takes most of us a long time, because we're trying
Yep.
to get all the harmonizations and everything. And we haven't even talked about the music theory behind how to assign parts and parallel fifths and all that kind of stuff that we try to avoid when we're orchestrating. But I think this has been a really great kind of primer. And Dave, thanks so much for taking the time.
Oh.
And I knew you'd be the perfect person for this, because we're both people doing this, and then we're also leading people who do this, and people are asking us questions. And so I thought it was an
Yeah,
important
yeah. I
topic.
think offering a perspective that has one foot in the quote unquote classical world and one foot in the modern kind of technical DAW world.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it's valuable to bring perspective to both sides.
Awesome. Well, man, thank you so much. And thanks everybody
Thank
for
you.
watching. And if you have any questions, put them down in the comments. I'll be happy to answer them. And we will talk to you guys on the next video. Thanks so much.
Peace.